And the next presentation is from the Tasmanian fruit industry and Dr. Michael Tarbath. It's their worker induction program.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Pam said, I'm Dr. Michael Tarbath. I'm the Policy and Engagement Officer for Fruit Growers Tas. Some people kind of ask, what is that? Well, it's a catch-all for everything from talking to growers, seasonal workers, all the way through to policy, how we engage with government, how we engage with other members of the supply chain. So I get all the fun problems. And one of our fun problems that has really become apparent in recent years has been the seasonal worker issue. You may have seen it in the media this year. It's become quite acute. So I thought today I would just talk through the induction program that we've set up, what the nature of the problem we were trying to fix is, how we've gone about trying to fix it. If the videos work, we might even be able to show you a couple of minutes of it. And then, just talk about where we're looking at taking this, going even further forward beyond the terms of this project. So, first off, I'd just like to acknowledge that we haven't done all this alone. We've had some fantastic input, particularly from Safe Farming Tasmania, which is a multi-department collaboration between primary industries and WorkSafe to try and reduce accidents and fatalities on farm. So those guys have been absolutely brilliant in helping us make sure we had just the right safety language and that it was at a level that is reflective of the diverse audience that you'll soon find out we're dealing with. So, does anyone here, could you just raise your hands if you've ever done any summer seasonal work? There's quite a few hands there. So you probably know the big issue I'm about to raise is communication. Essentially, for those who are unaware, seasonal work is any job that takes place in a short defined period as part of the growing stage, particularly of agricultural work. Quite often this is picking, pruning, harvesting, thinning, that sort of thing. And to do this, our employers in the sector are relying on short-term employees. For a crop like cherries, which is a big one in Tasmania, the employees might only be with the business for 6 weeks. For a longer-term one, apples, it's maybe 10 to 12 weeks. And for the berry industry, it can be as much as 6 months. So there's variable lengths, but people come, people go, according to their own needs, work commitments, family commitments, etc. We did a survey middle of last year to find out just how many seasonal workers our fruit sectors do rely on in this state. And we were a little bit shocked to find that even just the top 75, 80 businesses, just them alone require 8,000 roles in peak season. Now, when you account for staff turnover, people coming and going, that's a lot of people. It can be quite challenging to find a workforce, particularly a reliable workforce in that area. You know, it's short-term work, it's physically demanding. Particularly as you get started, you can have a lot of sore muscles as you're moving in ways that your body isn't used to. And it's outdoors. So it only appeals to a certain niche of the population. And what we find, particularly in our harvest work, is that it's a very diverse group that actually come and take part. Culturally, ethnically, age, it is probably one of the most broad occupations you'll find. So some figures just from our survey to help set the context on this. I think there might be a pointer on this, perhaps not. So it's broken down into, we've categorised it into 4 different groups. You've got Tasmanian residents as the first group. They're people who reside in Tasmania most of the time. Some of them only do seasonal work, in bits and pieces to suit their lifestyle, as I said. You'd think English would be the most common language, but because it's so ethnically diverse, actually Bhutanese, Nepalese, Karen, which I think is from Burma. Yeah, so there's a whole lot of languages that we're immediately off the bat going, these aren't the big ones we're used to. And they're perhaps the big multi-year core of our industry. International students, particularly this year, have been a big driver of particularly our summer harvest crops. This is what we would expect to find on the right. And if I flick to the next slide, you'll see the figure still there. So the orange represents the proportion, or I should say the number of people in the community who fit these 4 categories. And the orange at the base, that's the locals. And on top of that, if you look at the blue, that is that international student cohort. The international student cohort is very diverse. Anyone who's been around a university campus will know what I mean. There's a lot of languages present. English isn't quite as good as you might think it might be. There's a lot of Mandarin, Korean, Urdu, Hindi, a whole lot. And we particularly saw that in our workforce this summer. The other 2 main groups, working holiday makers, so otherwise known as backpackers. These are actually quite often highly skilled and trained professionals just taking some time off post-university and touring the world. So language skills, very good. Quite often bi or trilingual. English is very common. A couple of countries, English is less common, but they tend to move as a group and they can translate for each other. And the growing one we're seeing at the moment is Pacific Islanders. There's a couple of national programs for allowing growers to hire Pacific Islanders as a form of Australian foreign aid. So that's the Seasonal Worker Program and the Pacific Labour Scheme. And as you can see in that chart, that yellow bar represents the presence of the Pacific Island workers, often around 1,500 in the state at any one time out of that 8,000. Now they all speak their own languages, Tongan, Samoan, Bislama for Vanuatu, East Timorese have a couple of languages. So one of the recurring themes of this is that not everybody speaks English. And for our employers, that actually makes communicating basic safety advice and instruction really hard. You've got, the average cherry plantation would have probably 80 to 100 seasonal workers at once. From that, you might have 12 different ethnic groups. You might have 7 major languages. And you might have 30% who actually speak English. It's a really big challenge. For the berries, it's even harder. The medium-sized berry guys would have 200, 250 workers. And again, making sure that you can communicate with every single one of them, very challenging. And it's something our growers, they can't pick it, and individually, they're really struggling. So we flagged that as an area that the industry together could do something about to help with, particularly around the safety and induction side of that, so that people don't get hurt in our workplaces. First thing we did was we were looking to see what resources are out there, and we found most of them are out of date. Some growers had been using the same induction videos for the last 25 years. Just about worn the VHS cassette tape bare, just to put in context how much these things are loved. So there really was a void of information to help growers and to help the seasonal workers. So we thought, this is where we can step up and help. Obviously, there's different needs for the different aspects of the audiences. From a workers' need, from our conversations with them, they wanted something that was going to be available in their language. They wanted, we needed it to suit various ranges of literacy. I'm sure every industry has its challenges. In agriculture, numeracy and literacy are particularly challenging. Some occasionally market it as not the growth industry it is, but an industry of last resort. So literacy, numeracy can be very challenging, sometimes up to 30% illiteracy rates. So we have to be able to simplify our messaging right down. We need it to be relevant to people who've done the work before, and also to those people who've never done it before, don't know what they're in for, and need to prepare and learn how to do things the right way. Lastly, we want it to be as engaging and accessible as possible. We want someone to go, oh, I can't remember this detail. I'll go back off my own free will and look up what I should know to make sure I am safe, to make sure I am working safely and efficiently, to look after everyone. So that's the employee, the seasonal worker's point of view. For employers, we also need it to be relevant to their specific sector. For example, you might find a lot of safety stuff around using ladders, and the strawberry grower who says, all my plants are at ankle height or at waist height. I don't need my workers worrying about ladders. I've worked hard to get them right out of my sector. So, that relevance is important. They wanted it to be usable during inductions, but they also wanted it to be usable in the field, so that if any of their supervisors, because when you're running with teams of 100, 200 people, you need smaller, more manageable units, and their supervisors are often the front line, they need to be able to use it again as a facilitation tool. They need to be able to show at all times, this is what you do. Lastly, at an industry level, we didn't want it to be suited to any one business. We wanted it to be usable by all businesses. We needed it to reflect practices not of any one business, but of them all. So we needed more breadth than any one business really needed. So, with that background, what did we do? I was struck by this quote that's often attributed to Nelson Mandela. It's not actually his words, it's a paraphrasing that everyone likes to think he said, but it's not quite true. But the sentiment is right, that you can talk at someone in a language that they understand and you hope it goes ahead. But if you want someone to actually be safe at work, to practice these tenets, you really have to go a bit deeper than that. And it needs to be in a language that they understand natively. Now, this creates its own challenges. Given the literacy rates, etc., raised above, video was seen as being the best option, because not only could they read it, they could see it. They could see it in action. We could show and tell. And given modern media, YouTube, Vimeo, things like that, we can actually have a platform of sharing this freely and easily available. So the worker, the employee, they can all go and access at the same time. It had to show safe practice. One thing our industry had flagged is that a lot of previous resources would show what not to do with a big X, but they wouldn't actually show the worker what to do. So this was, if you do this, you're right. We're not going to show you any bad habits. And it had to cover all the key safety principles for each of the sectors we're working on. I haven't actually said what they are yet. So there's apple and pear, cherry and other summer fruit, strawberries, raspberries and blackberries, and blueberries. So we have 5 sectors to cover. Already that's a pretty wide audience. Particularly given background noise, given regional dialects. One of the languages we look at was, I may pronounce it wrong, Oromo. It's an Ethiopian dialect. You can have people coming from 2 valleys over, and the pronunciation is different. And that you can't guarantee the interpretation for one region is quite the same as the other. And we didn't want to fall into that trap. So we wanted a nice standard communication tool. I mean, another example would be simplified Chinese, Mandarin. They use the same written formats. It makes it much easier to communicate with a potentially broad and diverse audience. Obviously, there's also some production logistics side of this. When you're doing a narrated video, you have to pay per word. And for the number of languages we felt we needed to cover, that was going to get astronomical. Lastly, if you're relying on people being able to hear it, it actually makes it hard to use it in things like the field environment, like in a packhouse shed, where there is ambient background noise. So we wanted it to be usable in essentially all environments. And by going with a text-based, visually reinforced video system, we had the combination of these things. We had production efficiency, we had diversity of language, we had could be used anywhere. So that's where we went. As anyone who's produced a video knows, you never get it right the first time. You So we deliberately went for a workflow which would be iterative and would essentially, each time we went through it with a new employer, we would find more gaps and fill more gaps. And by doing so, we would gradually fill the whole picture. So each time we went through it, it was, we identified the gaps, went out, captured the relevant footage we needed. We developed the supporting text to go with it. And this is really where WorkSafe and Safe Farming Tas were brilliant. They helped us take what could be quite technical messages and distill it down to its simple, most easily communicated essence. And then we'd move on to the next employer, and through this iterative process, things got better and better each time. And we did that till Grower was like, I can't think of anything more to add. And we're like, that's when we finally know that we're about where we need to be. So once we'd done that with the English videos, because, for example, there's no point doing that with videos in Mandarin if none of the growers speak Mandarin. So once we did that, we had compiled the whole text run sheet, and we reached out to local translators through a local service provider, and we got them translated. Now, hopefully this works. We'll have a go. So this is the English version. This is just one of the 5. I figured you wouldn't want to see them all. There's a lot of repeated elements. But with each video, we broke it down into 4 key areas. One is outdoor safety, so things that the user should be preparing for at the start of each day. That's everything from safety equipment to sun hats to making sure they bring water so they don't become dehydrated. And just because we wanted to raise early, people always ask us one, snakes. So, after that we moved on to the specifics of the job roles that they would be doing. For many of these it's actually outdoor picking work. There's separate things in place for packing sheds, they're much easier, they're much more like a factory system. But outdoor work is a bit harder. So, here's the snakes. So with the outdoor work, we wanted to show them how to do their job and how to do it efficiently, as well as the safety aspects. Again, we wanted to drive that engagement so that, and we did it nice and early on, that this is relevant for them. Keep coming back anytime you want pointers to see what you should be doing. How to put on the equipment, how to avoid lifting and heavy injury strain. How to use ladders safely. We all know ladders, the figures, the injury figures on ladders are astronomical. Whatever can go wrong, particularly when they've got 3 legs. People don't cope with 3 legs. As I said, this one's for apples, but it's just as valid for cherries and raspberries. Well, ladders aren't, but. We show them how to safely pick the fruit, how to manage their quality, how to avoid bruising it, and also avoid movement and lifting strain, because that bag of apples is 10 kilos more. Some figures I heard recently coming from New Zealand, someone worked out the figures for someone working a whole apple harvest season. If they're going up and down ladders throughout the length of the season, they're essentially going up and down as much as if they were climbing Mount Everest. And 1 bag of apples at a time, they're moving the mass equivalent of a blue whale in 1 harvest season. So we need them to do it safely, bit by bit, in a way that does not injure them, either in a one-off incident where they're doing something too heavy, or through repetitive straining. So we cover things like just the whole process to make it as one-stop as possible for the grower, for the worker. I probably should go to the next slide, or I'll keep talking through this whole thing and I'll go over time. So we cover everything like how to move safely around the farm, giving way to vehicles, first aid, hygiene, health, workplace amenities, things like that. So, moving on. And then once it was done, I'm going to leave that one running in the background. We were able to then start getting the text translated into different languages, I said. We ended up with a list of 14 languages, if you include English, based on talking to we talked to about a dozen growers. And, whilst the same languages might have come up 5 or 6 times, Some of them came up 2 or 3 times, often enough that they were significant. Don't ask me to name all 14. I cannot. I need a list in front of me. But they are the list that I did present earlier under each demographic. So with the 14 languages, we do cover the ones that are, from the local resident population. So things like Oromo, Bhutanese, English. We then covered some for the international students, the most common ones of them that we'd seen throughout the season. We covered particularly the Pacific Islander ones as well, which are a new and emerging area, which I'll touch on in a sec. And for the backpackers, we didn't have to do many, but French seems to be a bit of a challenge. Some of the French ones that come out don't speak English, but often the ones from, say, Croatia, Germany, Denmark, etc., they all speak probably better English than I do. So they weren't necessarily the target audience, but we thought if they're new to it, everyone starts somewhere, we still want them to pay attention. So, moving beyond those initial production stages, I forgot to include this in the slides because I thought I only had 20 minutes, not 30. As Pam was discussing earlier, there is a need for feedback to see that people have engaged. So we actually then worked with a web developer just to do a simple quiz, safety quiz after each one, just to show that they'd engaged with the material. Persons doing so would then receive a certificate, which the purpose for this was twofold. One, they could take it to their employer and say, look, I've seen it, I've gone through it, I understand, and the employer can go, tick. Two, if they change employer, they don't necessarily have to go through the same thing again if they can show that they've already underwent it at least once that year. So that's part of it. The second part is we've started having, particularly recently, as more businesses have become aware that we've been doing this work, they're going, hang on, do you still have the translated text? Because that would be really useful if I said, do not stand on or above this step on a ladder, and I had it in their language on the ladder. If I could, access this translated material to put up signs around my farm. So just going through the simple things of creating these videos, even the production materials themselves, are finding purposes and ways to improve the safety on our farms. In addition to that, a lot of the farmers are starting to rethink, a lot of them gone, these are the people I've had for the last 10 years. And as I'll just touch on, there's some changes afoot, particularly with our industry sector. Pam mentioned earlier about COVID, and I'm sure everyone's been over the safety impacts of COVID a lot. We're seeing other impacts in our industries. As general, all sorts of fun projects land on my desk person for the fruit industry. I can tell you last year was a very fun year. We had obviously the safety implications of workers being able to pick and harvest the fruit. We then had, would we be able to pack it given social distancing, spacing and packing shed orientation and setup, so that was fun. We then had, would there be aeroplanes to fly it to our export markets? And then finally, given the deteriorating situation with at least one of our main trading partners, could we even sell it? So a lot of fun questions. And then there's been the gift that keeps giving, will we have a workforce in the first place to pick it? So backpackers have traditionally been the mainstay of Australian horticulture, and Tasmania's been no exception. You've got a smart, educated, literate, numerate workforce that, like a grower, wants to make as much money as possible, and the grower wants to get the work done as fast as possible. So they have been the employee of choice. But we have seen since March last year, the number of backpackers in this country have gone from 160,000 down to 40,000. And that's nationally. And that 40,000 is then also having to be spread amongst tourism and hospitality as well. So the workforce dynamics have changed. The demographics have changed. International students who'd previously made up maybe 10%, 12% of the workforce were suddenly making up 20 or 30. Pacific Island workers, once they were allowed in the country, again, through quarantine, they're now set to take on a larger role. As more and more growers are going, it will be 3-5 years before we expect backpacker numbers to get anywhere near where they were. And then we've got increased reliance on locals and the ethnically diverse background they're coming from. So the language makeup for a given business is shifting rapidly, any given business, in response to these trends. In addition, you've got new ways of trying to use what little labour you can get. And I can tell you now, at this time of year, we're still just scraping by on the skin of our teeth. Most picking teams are running 30% below where they'd normally be. Some picking teams are running 50%, and there were some horror stories of running about 10%. So, we're seeing a proliferation of new technologies aimed partly at reducing the number of workers needed, but mainly about making the work available to new people who previously haven't done it. So picking work has traditionally been highly physically demanding, and up and down ladders. You want someone tall, someone fit, someone strong. And what we're seeing is technology stepping up to the plate to reduce those safety impacts, those repeated straining injuries, etc. And we've now got essentially information resources that can be updated, and we can just put in new sections to keep abreast of all these changing trends. Picking platforms, you may have seen in the media, you may not. 12 months ago, there was one in the state. There's now, I think, 9. And there's plans for at least another 9. So, these things are exploding. It's all about, if you don't have a workforce, and there are parts of the population who've said, it's just too physically demanding for me. The industry's going, look, we can make it, we can make this an industry of choice. So we can now adapt and evolve to these changing workplace trends. What we're also seeing, as I said, is that the demographics are changing. We're likely to see more Pacific Islanders in the workforce. Now, from a safety point of view, safety is not just physical safety. Safety is also mental safety. And with these Pacific Island workers, there is a higher safety threshold that's required for these. The employees are now responsible not just for their physical safety, but for their mental health. They're to provide pastoral care. These are people who will be living away from home for up to 6 months, possibly longer, away from their families, in the middle of a pandemic. So we're seeing a lot more engagement on the safety front of people going, okay, I'm going to have to take that step. What do I need to know, and how can I make this as easy for the worker as possible? So I think that covers most things I've got to talk about. I don't know how I'm going for time.
That's fine if you want to finish and
Yeah,
answer the questions.
that would be good if there are any questions.
I really have a suggestion.
Yep.
My name's Vicky. Dr. Tarbath, inspired by Erica Bett's call for fruit pickers, I think it should be mandatory for all people wanting to become politicians to spend at least one season picking fruit.
I can agree with the sentiment, but I would say why stop at just picking fruit? I'm not about to get political, but certainly for the people who lead society, it's always good if they do stay connected to those at the coalface of all sectors. So I can certainly agree with the sentiment, but there aren't that many politicians, and we need so many more workers.
My question is, this is a wonderful initiative, and are there plans to take it forward into other high-risk industries such as aquaculture, which is closely aligned to farming? So,
That's a really good question. It's not one I can really speak on as, we're the industry association for the fruit sector. We're certainly very supportive of similar initiatives for other, even aspects of agriculture, vegetable production, broadacre cropping. Aquaculture, it's not an area I'm terribly familiar with. My understanding is that they have been very proactive in the safety space. So I imagine if they haven't thought of it, they soon will be going down a similar path, because they do draw from a lot of the same workforce, as your question does allude to, that they are very much sister industries.
These new safety platforms that they work from what I saw on TV, they look very much like elevating work platforms, which you need a licence for. Do they need a licence to drive these?
My understanding is that you do not. Certainly the businesses that have invested in it have certainly been looking at all of these details. It's $150,000 investment per platform, so they're very much doing all their homework before they commit any money. But certainly they do have leading hands that are the ones driving it. So these are often ongoing members of staff from which they do have time to invest in ongoing training. So I don't think it quite answers the question, but it's as good an answer as I'm afraid I can provide.
With the uptake of this, is this something which will, if they go to one farm, will it be then accepted on many? Or we had a similar thing in mining several years back with the TIMI induction system, with the intent that it was brought in as this will be an industry-wide mining induction. However, what we saw after that was it became pointless because every mine still continued doing their own induction, so the uptake on it was really poor because it didn't flow onto other mines. Is that a risk with this, or how are you addressing that concern?
That's a really good question. Realistically, a lot of our growers have their own, a lot of the basics are different from place to place, where a block is located, toilets, facilities, etc. What the growers have called out for this one is about standardising and making sure all bases are covered. One of the aspects I didn't allude to is the sheer number of inductions that our industry people are having to provide. Given the changing demographics and an increased reliance on locals, a lot of locals have answered the call and put their hands up and at least given it a go. But many find within the first day or two that it's not for them. So growers are often having to run inductions every day or every second day to fill, half of their picking teams. So this is an aid for them so that they don't miss things. They can make sure everything is covered.
So if somebody does this, will they receive a card or something? So say I've done raspberry picking in December, I then want to move into grapes. Will that be something the industry will accept that, yes, I've already done this section of it, I'll only have to do a site-specific induction, or is it sort of, will people have to repeat it each time?
Within an industry sector, no, we're expecting it to not require to be repeated. I mean, if they do want to rewatch it, good. If their employer thinks that they should rewatch it anyway, just to be covered, good. But certainly moving between sectors, there are differences and challenges between all sectors. So if you were moving from, say, rubus, whether it's raspberries or blackberries, to something like grapes, particularly something like apples, things like ladders aren't covered in rubus that they are in others, and the expectation would be that they would go through and rewatch. And so it does generate certificates for each particular one that they have gone through. I like questions. It means someone at least thought it was interesting.
I may have missed it earlier on, but did you say there's any spoken word in any of those videos options? I'm thinking of people with vision issues or very, very poor literacy that can identify symbols but not necessarily words.
No, there is no spoken word. In terms of the vision issues, it is one of the challenges of our industry that people do have to be able to tell ripe fruit from not. Now, a significant proportion of the population, for example, are red-green colourblind. That can make it very hard to tell a ripe apple from a non-ripe apple. So we're working within the limits of what we realistically can. What we have found is that those with particularly acute literacy issues often do pair up with someone who can read things to them. So, and we're relying as much on the visual aids and the great big tick signs. It's why we went the video route with both the image and the text. So, that's about all I can offer, I'm afraid. Excellent. Thank you.
I'm sure you'll all agree that was absolutely fascinating. The detail that and great effort that's gone into the development of those training induction packages. I normally incorporate in the Better Work Tas networking sessions a little bit of time between presentations just to chat and mix a bit. So we are running to time, which is great. So if you'd like just to take 5 minutes or so just to stand, and we have been sitting for a whole hour now, so by all means get up and have another coffee or something to eat, and we'll get back to starting the next presentation for about 3 o'clock. Thank you.